Professional wrestler Pete Dunne is best known for being the longest reigning WWE UK champion. He kindly took time out from his busy schedule to bring us this interview. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, how long have you been a fan of wrestling, and at what age did you start training?
I was a fan of wrestling as long as I can remember, really. I started wrestling when I was 12 years old, so
wow.
So that was sort of at the height of my fandom. So really, as long as I can remember, I've been wrestling now more time in my life than I haven't. So,
yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And how long was it when you started training before you started competing?
Well, I started at not the best school in the world. I started in literally a little community centre in Coventry, so they weren't opposed to putting me out on shows almost right away.
Oh wow!
So yeah, probably the first paying customers probably about 13 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. And did you realise early on that you had a gift for the sport, and did your coaches sort of see that?
I think they did. I think anyone who's such a huge fan of wrestling as I was you sort of know the ins and outs of it before you even get into it, especially being like a kid from the internet, you know what I mean, being able to research everything about it. So I think they probably saw more potential in me than I felt myself. But being that age, it's so hard to get a grasp of the physical side of things. It took a long time to really start matching any potential people thought I had. That took years and years of trial and going out there and failing miserably in front of tiny audiences to get around to there.
Bless you. Yeah, it takes a brave man. And so how long before you turned pro?
So it's kind of a weird one because pro wrestling is the art form itself. That sort of defines it from amateur wrestling, which would be, for lack of a better term, the real competition. And what we do, pro wrestling, is the art form. So it's hard to say. Even up until the day that I signed a WWE contract, I was still doing part-time landscaping work and stuff like that because I would save up enough money to be able to go out to Japan for 6 months or to the US or to China or wherever I could, wherever there was more wrestling or wrestling that I perceived to be better than here, where I could learn more. But in the meantime, I would have to do part-time jobs at first I did restaurant work, and then eventually I did a few years of landscaping work. So I don't really consider myself going fully professional until I find that.
It's a bit different from how I imagined, right? I get you. And being such a huge fan of wrestling, how did it feel becoming the UK WWE champ?
Well, that's a crazy one because I didn't even know that sort of dream existed because coming from the UK, 1 or 2 people would make it. It was this light at the end of the tunnel that maybe 1-2 people, usually over 6 foot tall and 250 pounds lean, usually 1 or 2 of those people would make it and the rest of us wouldn't. So I thought it would be a much longer route, but amidst my career starting to take off and I was contemplating spending more time in Japan, or the UK scene was starting to get a bit busier, so I was able to make okay money. The WWE started showing interest in the UK as it was growing in popularity, and right place, right time, I guess. Being able to go out in Blackpool in front of a fully UK audience that most of them already know who we were and have already followed our career, to be able to go out in front of them and that be a debut to the rest of the world. In wrestling, you don't really have an overnight success. I mean, it took 10 years, so it's not really that, but at least to the American audience especially, that like overnight success feeling isn't common anymore. And myself and Tyler Bay and Trent Seven, Mark Andrews, all these people that I grew up with in wrestling, we really had that experience, which I'm so grateful for because it's so unique for wrestling.
Yeah, nice. And the guy you mentioned, Tyler Bay, he's the guy that you won the title from, isn't he?
Yeah.
Is that right? I heard a rumour from one of my followers that he's also vegan. Is that true?
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many British wrestlers are vegan.
Wow.
I've been on shows where I'd say probably half of the locker room are.
No.
Yeah.
Shuts the front door.
Pretty well. The first person I ever heard of in British wrestling to become vegan was a guy called Zack Sabre Jr. who was the first of our lot to really start to break out there and do a little bit in the US and do a lot in Japan and stuff. And he was a big influence on me to go vegan. And then I feel like from there, I probably influenced people like Tyler, and then it just spread down the scene. And now you can be in a locker room and there's sometimes half the people. And above that, there's a lot of people reducing their meat intake, their dairy intake, stuff like that. So it's really positive.
That is fantastic. Now, it's such a demanding sport. It's so physical and powerful, and you must have great stamina. How much time do you have to dedicate to training each week?
At the minute, more so than ever, because I'm back in the UK due to the current situation. So at the minute, all I'm doing is focusing on training, which I understand is a really hard time for people. But for me, it's been a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because in all these years now, I haven't had time off even for an injury.
Wow.
Even when I broke my foot, which is the biggest injury I've had, but I was still back and forth to the States. And so I haven't really felt like, even though I wasn't wrestling for those like 5 or 6 weeks, I haven't had time off from the grueling schedule. Wow. So being able to be back here and being able to focus on my training, I've been able to train twice a day and get myself in the best shape of my life. Aside from that, it's just fitting it in where you can. It's not like a lot of sports where you train for this event. It's just we're wrestling so much and traveling so much that you get it in if and when you can, you know.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a little bit different, and everyone's approach to training varies, and approach to diet varies based on how busy they are. Basically, there'll be times where my training and diet suffers, but I'm getting more work than I ever had on the independents. Working with WWE has been great because it is a little bit calmer in that sense. I am able to plan my training and my diet a bit better.
Nice. And so what type of training are you doing? I imagine you're obviously doing some resistance training and obviously a lot of wrestling practice. Do you have to do specific cardio as well?
So when I'm over in the States, we have a strength and conditioning coach at the Performance Center, it's called. And so he puts us on a strength and conditioning plan. A lot of the cardio stuff you would do yourself outside of that. I tend to do a lot of it because of the style that I wrestle. But as for the strength training, a lot of it's functional. A lot of it isn't about pushing yourself to your absolute limit every time. You know, you're not going to failure every time because we're wrestling so often. And they do such a great job over in the States of being able to manage both sides of that. But as opposed to me being here right now and not wrestling as much, I've been able to go back to my roots, almost go back to, you know, powerlifting / bodybuilding style training, being able to train with a intensity that I haven't for a few years, because right now the only focus is training, which has been great.
Sure. Fantastic. And so when and why did you decide to go vegan?
So it's been so long now. I think it's been about 5 or 6 years that it's hard for me to really remember exactly what led to it. But I do remember, even growing up, I always had the idea that it felt right that eventually once I'm on the back end of my wrestling career and I don't have to be in shape. Obviously, I thought that you need meat and dairy to be in that kind of shape, that I would want to become vegan. And then I stumbled across Vegan Gains videos. And even though I didn't like his approach and I wanted to disagree with him, I really wanted to disagree with him, but the points he was making, I really struggled to disagree. So I watched more and more, and then that led me down the rabbit hole on YouTube, and I came across things like Cowspiracy. And I think that was the final straw for me, was watching Cowspiracy, and the next day deciding, right, I'm going to just give this a try. But the biggest part of it for me was realising there are athletes in the world that are doing this. And it coincided with wrestling starting to change a little bit, because it wasn't necessarily about being the biggest anymore. It wasn't about that aesthetic look as much as it was the performance side of it. And when I went down that rabbit hole and started looking into it, I realised you could perform exactly the same. And arguably my diet was so bad before that I'd be able to improve my performance and improve my physique, which did happen over time.
Fantastic. Now that I understand that you, like me, eat a predominantly whole foods vegan diet, how's that been for you? So you say you've got some sort of benefits you feel?
Yeah, definitely. Because before I went vegan, I don't know if it's necessary. I like to believe that it's the veganism that makes me that made me feel so much better and improve my performance. But honestly, my diet was so traditionally bodybuilding, powerlifting bad. You know, it was carbs and meat. That was how we ate. So and in excessive amounts. There's no wonder that I felt so bad. So being able to then transition over to a whole food vegan diet and experiencing all these different foods and vegetables and different micronutrients I definitely wasn't getting before. I would say that's where the improvement came from. I like to believe that it's fully just because I went vegan, but I think just broadening my horizons to being able to say, here's all these different foods that I've now got access to that I never in a million years would have eaten before. I think that helps a lot.
Sure. Yeah, personally, when I went vegan, I actually ate, in the first years, I ate 500 different fruits and vegetables and legumes and herbs and spices. Anything new, I just tried it. And yeah.
Especially when you're traveling, because for me, I'd be the guy, you'd always get the safest thing on the menu. I'm looking for chicken breast and rice, or if you're eating something bad, then a burger, you know, that was kind of what I'd eat. Whereas now, being on the road, and sometimes you're in a strange country, you know, you have no idea where you are. You're looking for a menu. There might only be one option, and that's what you're eating that day. So, and then you realise there's all these other foods that taste brilliant and are great for you, and you don't feel terrible the next morning. You're able to wake up having more energy to train and stuff like that. So, and it also become a fun part of what we do, because me and so many of my friends travel together, especially Tread 7 and Tyler, like we talked about before. You know, the three of us would travel everywhere together, and it became, you know, it's quite mundane sometimes when you're on the road, especially with the schedule that we held up. So a fun part of it would be seeking out new vegan restaurants and different vegan food. So yeah, it's definitely helped that side of things too.
Sounds awesome. So what are some typical meals that you'll eat sort of day in, day out?
Protein-wise, I try and stick to stuff like tempeh when I'm back home, and I can cook it right and stuff. I just feel it digests a little bit better than eating a lot of beans and stuff like that.
It's fermented, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and then other than that, I don't really. When I'm cooking myself back here, I don't necessarily do anything too unusual. Just standard. Enjoy whole foods, and I count calories. So obviously, it's important for me to get stuff like tempeh, which has a great macronutrient profile and stuff. So
yeah, lovely. And what supplements do you take?
So I take B12. I take vitamin D and an omega-3. That's about it. Other than that, like protein, creatine, stuff like that. But in terms of like health supplements, it would be those three.
Yeah. And so tell us about your calories and macros and whether you find it difficult to fulfill all those as a vegan.
No, it's really easy. I will say it will probably take time to realise. So, something I've realised over the last few months is to not stress as much about individual macronutrients and let that work itself out. As long as you're eating enough protein and you're hitting a calorie requirement, things will just work out themselves. So I don't stress about that too much. And I think that especially as a vegan helps a lot, because sometimes there's tag-along carbs in different sources of protein and stuff like that, and it can mess with your head a little bit and stress you out. And in the last few months, I've realised there's no need to worry about that, as long as you're hitting that protein requirement, which isn't as high as people think either.
Yeah.
And then let the rest work itself out. And as long as it's, you know, mostly whole foods, you should be fine.
Yeah, and yeah, that's been my experience as well. Yeah, total cows, get enough protein, and just, you know, you eat your whole foods, you get some carbs, you get some fats, but yeah, like you say, you really don't need to stress, do you?
I think the fitness industry is influenced so heavily by the bodybuilding culture, and I think that's where the obsession over macronutrients comes in. Because I think people are the people that are getting advice from are the people that are stepping on stage, and of course, then you will have to manipulate carbohydrates, fats, and stuff like that to suit your physique. But for the average Joe or even your average athlete, I really don't think it's that important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So how has eating vegan affected your sports performance and sense of well-being in any way? I know you said you got a bit of positive benefits. Can you elaborate on that? And has there been any negatives, would you say?
I remember when I first went vegan, that first maybe 4 to 8 weeks, was hell. My digestion was terrible. The bloating was awful. But I'd done enough research to know that that should subside. And then once it did, that's when I started to feel the benefits. And without trying, I dropped a bunch of weight and stuff. So I definitely did see benefits to begin with, but it's been so long now that it's hard for me to remember how I felt before and how I felt after. And I think when you first go vegan, you're so positive about the change that you're making that maybe little things, maybe my sleep might have been better and I would have put it down to the diet. Maybe, maybe not, who knows? And I like to try and be as, sit on the fence as much as possible, because ultimately you will know in your own body. You'll know as your digestion improves and stuff like that. Like, you will have more energy, your sleep might get better, that kind of stuff. And it all comes down to your diet, whether that's because you've taken out meat or you're just eating much healthier stuff. I'm not really the person to say, but I do know that I have felt better since.
Lovely. Good to hear. Now, I understand that you're bringing your young daughter up as a vegan as well. Obviously, a lot of people are very misinformed. I mean, the biggest nutritional authorities in the world, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, British Dietetics Association, they all say that a well-planned vegan diet is perfect for anyone, any stage of life, any age, and can bring health benefits. But with so many people misinformed, have you had any sort of negative reactions from family or friends, anyone?
Everything's been really positive. I think I'm looking that my sister is vegan, my brother was vegan for a while, so my family's embraced it quite well. Loads of my friends are vegan and everyone respects that decision. So I haven't really had any negativity. I don't really share too much about her online, so I'd be interested to see the response to this and see how fans react to that. But ultimately, I think you can, for me anyway, it's reassuring to hear things like from the World Health Organization saying these things. And a book that you put to me on, the Becoming Vegan book, was really reassuring, being able to read through that and realise maybe we're putting, because a big concern with your kid is always, are they eating enough? Are they eating the right things? Being able to read through that and be able to see that, oh yeah, it seems fine. Because I'm not going to lie, it is a concern. I never thought it would be. I was always so confident that, oh yeah, well, we'll just raise our kids vegan. But then once you're actually doing it, the thoughts, of course, they do enter your mind. But I look at her and she's so happy and healthy and she's thriving. And then I think what a lot of other people's kids eat who aren't vegan, I don't feel like it's an argument of veganism versus meat eaters versus, I feel like the argument should be more whole foods versus processed foods. I think we started with that, taking the ethical side away from it. But if you're looking at the healthy side of it, I feel like if we looked at it as whole foods versus processed foods, for the most part, I really feel like that's a more important issue. And then the ethical side of it is everybody's individual decision.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what would you say to any guys that are interested in becoming vegan, but they're worried that they may appear less manly or they're going to get a load of stick off their mates?
Yeah, it's just silly, isn't it? I feel like once you make that connection with the ethical side of it, I feel like it's on you to do something about that. And if there's people who can't be vegan, who feel like they can't be vegan for health reasons and that kind of stuff, there's enough information out there now for you to have a bit more confidence with it. Like that book, the Becoming Vegan book, is brilliant. And then YouTube channels like yourself and Brian Turner, people like that I've watched, is great to see that, it's how could it possibly have an effect on manliness? The issue should be the health side of it. And when you really do that research and you look through and you see that there's all these healthy people thriving on it, then why not give it a try?
Yeah, nicely put. Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, I think we're good.
We've got it all covered. Pete, thank you so much for agreeing to this interview and for being such a positive role model for vegans.
Cheers, man.
Have an awesome day, my friend.
Thank you.
Now click this.